Hi, I'm Ali Board and I'm very pleased to bring you the latest colour in my collection of watercolour paints. The star of the show today is going to be Cobalt Turquoise. And to really show it off, I am going to be painting this Basilisk Lizard. Now I've already drawn it out onto my Milford watercolour paper. I've sketched it out, I've used some detail here and there, and I've left it quite loose in other places. Now before I get to add the exciting colour, I'm going to do some work with a sketching pen. And the sketching pen I'm going to be using for this is one of these. It's waterproof, but what makes it a little bit different is that it's dark blue instead of some of the more standard colours that you might find, such as black, brown, grey and similar. I just thought that for this subject matter, rather than concentrating on black in between all the scales of the texture, I thought it might be rather lovely and in keeping with the colour that I'm going to use to concentrate on blue rather than on black. So let's get started, shall we? And I thought it would be rather lovely to get blue involved in these colours as opposed to something else, because we're going to be using Cobalt Turquoise. So I'm going to use it for all the dark areas. This is going to be a very loose painting, a study of this lizard and a study of the texture, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. I want to record a little bit of personality in the lizard, but I want to be able to wash colour over the top of it and really let that Cobalt Turquoise sing. So I've popped a little bit of detail in the eye. Just because it's dark blue doesn't matter, it's still plenty deep enough. And then I'm going to make some marks around the rest of the lizard to show some of the facial features, some of the scales and the way they overlap. And then when I have completed the pen work, I'm going to allow it to dry and we can wash the watercolour over the top and create some interesting textures. So the marks that I'm making with this pen, I am trying to vary. So we've got a few dots and dashes, we've got some scribbles going on. Some of the lines are joined up to really show depth of colour or detail. Some of them have got spaces in between to allow me to be able to wash colour over the top of them without them looking like a mistake. I vary them around my picture. Sometimes I have a very light touch with my pen, sometimes I press a little more heavily, exactly the same as I would do with my watercolour brush. Let's just do the back of the head first, these kind of incredible scales and the way the fins are built up on the surface of our lizard. So I've got a nice kind of zigzag mark being made in there, coming over the top of this part. Coming down the back. I'm looking at my reference material all the time to guide me as to where I need to make a mark, but like I said, this is just a quick sketch, a quick study of our lizard, rather than more a botanical style of painting and drawing. So let's get the folds in the neck. You can see I've got a bit of a scribble going on to show that it's not all even. Coming down here, I don't want to make too much of the shoulder. I don't want to concentrate on the limbs of the lizard because that's not where my point of interest is. Coming down into here, let's just show that the lizard's lying on a log. Let's tackle this mouth shape now. Again, I don't want to do all of the lines. I want to show those cracks, kind of more crocodile, alligator-like, around the face, very reptilian. Let's get a solid line in there for where the mouth closes and where you can see the jawline and that hinge mark. Let's make a little scribble in here to show that there is more of a depth of colour going in and coming round the bottom of the jaw. I want the majority of the shadows to be taken care of in the pen so that I can let that colour sing over the surface. I can wash it on and do some interesting textural effects with it, and I don't need to worry too much about the detail. So let's bring that down. We've got this recess here. Let's put some shading in, but again, I don't want to make too formal a shape about that. I'm looking at it all the time. Let's put those folds into the neck. And then let's just give a kind of a nod to what the lizard is lying on. Again, this is not what the painting's about. It's merely to show that the lizard is gripping onto something. We'll put the remainder of that foot in, and let's put a few little textural marks for the log. Do I want to do anything else to this? Maybe I can deepen that eye a little more. I think a few little dots and dashes wouldn't go amiss to get that filled in. I think that's going to be fine. Now, it's a good idea with a waterproof pen, even if you absolutely know that it's waterproof, you still need to allow it to dry on the surface. Very often these are spirit-based. If you go straight in with your paint, there is a chance that it will still run. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to put a very wishy-washy background in to make sure that something is going to offset our lizard. Then I can wait for it all to dry before we carry on. Now, because I'm going to be using Cobalt Turquoise for the background, rather than necessarily using something dark as it is in the photograph, I thought it would be fun to play about with some complementary pairings. So those are colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel. And if I show you my colour chart that I've got here, hopefully it will make a bit more sense. So here is the Cobalt Turquoise that we're going to be using for the lizard, and we are probably going to be mixing that with another of my watercolour collection, which is Bees Gold, because I want to create some greens. I think as well what we're going to do is use Quinacridone Magenta in the background, because turquoises and magentas, greens and reds are opposite each other on the colour wheel, and I think it will be quite an interesting optical vibration to put in our background. So let's get started on that. I have my colour squeezed out into a pan like this. I'm going to set that to one side temporarily, and I'm going to get some other implements ready. I've got a size 12 Imitation Sable brush here, and I'm going to need a spray bottle, and I'm going to need a piece of kitchen roll as well, which I'm going to scrunch up just to knock some of the texture out of it. So let's get cracking and do this background. Bit of a spritz in the background of water. What that does is buy me time so that I can get some nice soft edges. I'm not going to be doing the log in a pink. What I'm going to be doing is a little bit of black iron oxide, I think, in the background for that. So let's take care of that all at the same time. So we'll put some water down here at the bottom too. Let's get that black iron oxide ready as well, shall we? Then with my brush, let's go straight into that Quinacridone Magenta. Now, you don't need very much of this. It's a very strong colour, and I would like my background to be quite soft. So what we'll do is we'll pick up just a small amount of it, wash it into our background. This is only to provide a backdrop for our lizard. We're not making any statement with it, really. We are simply letting the colour of the Cobalt Turquoise, we want to promote it. So if we use a pink in the background, that's going to work really nicely. And then if we go in with the black iron oxide, which is a colour that granulates very heavily, so you'll get an interesting texture out of it, I can lay some of that down onto my log. Again, this is not what the painting is about. It's not about the detail in the log, it's about the colour of the lizard. So if I swipe just a small amount of that black iron oxide in over the top, it will give a nod to the fact that the lizard is attached to something. Let's deepen that under that chin area, but we don't have to make too much of a fuss about it. Painting around, so I'm painting negatively now, kind of painting around my subject matter. Let's continue some of that colour, to re-wet my brush, down at the base, just under the belly of the lizard, so that it kind of all adds up and makes sense. And possibly a little bit extra at the top, but then I think we will call it a day, because what I want to do is get my kitchen roll involved. Do a small amount of rag rolling on the back just to keep an eye on the moisture, give it an interesting texture. And then let's pull our kitchen roll into more of a concertina shape, and we can roll that over the edge of our log to take care of some of the texture and the water. And there we have it, nothing too much consequence. Certainly enough of a backdrop that in just a minute we'll be able to wash that beautiful cobalt turquoise over the top to really make our lizard stand out. But the first thing I need to do is let it dry. My background is now completely dry, as is my pen work. You can always accelerate that drying with a hairdryer or a low heat gun if that makes it easier for you. Now I can concentrate on my lizard and I can really start to play with that cobalt turquoise. Now here is that cobalt turquoise colour, a very soft, kind of subtle turquoise with a very deep tone. And what that means is rather than being very pale, I'm going to be able to get very rich colours out of it and very soft colours out of it too. And I think what we're going to do as well, we're going to introduce what's called Bees Gold, a lovely soft yellow. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix those two together to create a slightly different green so that we get some variegation in our lizard. Let's go over to the palette and let's pick up some of that cobalt turquoise. I'm only going to really need a tiny touch of the yellow. I need to have that lovely kind of bluey mass tone on there. I only need to alter it slightly. So let's pick up a tiny touch of that Bees Gold. That might be too much, but let's see how we get on. Oh, that's not too bad. It's kind of quite a rich green, but I'm not sure that that's actually enough colour for what I need. So let's repeat that process. Let's pick up that turquoise, add that back in. That's definitely too blue now. Wet my brush just to pull a little more out of the container. Roll my brush so that I get rid of as much colour on the palette as possible. Wash it out to clean it and then pick up that little bit of Bees Gold so that I get a kind of stronger green tone. That's going to work brilliantly. Now, while that's on my brush, rather than sticking it back into the water, let's start there. So we're going to bring that across to our lizard. And like I said, this is not a botanical study of this lizard. What we're trying to do is give it a touch of colour. So we will work our way. I'm still working with a large brush, probably going to work with a smaller brush later. But to block in our lizard, that will be fine and dandy. And I'm using a blending out technique to soften some of the edges of this colour so that I can get it fading one into the next. I'm leaving some white patches of paper. In the photographic reference, you'll notice that there's quite a texture on the scales. And actually, I'm going to leave white paper behind for that. Let's come down into the back and the neck, looking lizard-like already. Really pleased with it. Coming down, nice strong colour, down into the neck area, coming back over onto the shoulder. It's got that kind of white fin down its back again. This isn't about the sort of lower portions of the lizard. What we're trying to do is get it coloured in so that it gives it rich texture and some personality. So we'll get that damp brush in, moving the colour around. We can also go in with the kitchen roll if we choose to, if there's any part of it that you're not too sure about. But here goes, let's get that cobalt turquoise on there because I can't wait to introduce this colour. So let's get it swiped around. Interesting how different it is from the colour that we made it up with the Bees Gold. You've got that two-tone now in the lizard, which is going to give it bags of personality. So let's wipe it over that pen, coming down into the nose area. Again, I don't need to fill it all in. It's not imperative. This is more like a pen and wash style of painting than worrying all about the watercolour necessarily. Shall we just, while we're here, let's get a bit around the eye. Could possibly do with the eye, it could have been greener, but you know what, it doesn't matter. It's not going to look any less like a lizard because I've altered the colours. And where those others are still damp, one is blending into the other and doing all the hard work for me. Let's take some water, soften that area, go back into our pan of colour. Again, not too worried about showing the folds, any of that kind of thing. The pen is going to take care of that for me. Coming down into this area, let's swipe some colour into that shoulder. Almost using my paintbrush more like a pen than I am necessarily a brush. Scribbling away with it, making patterns in my paint. I can still have some hard lines coming down. I think that's going to make for an interesting texture on the lizard. Let's soften some of this and let's put a small little wash of colour down into the leg and the foot. Again, so that we can say that this is part of the lizard and have a good old look at it. I think I could do, whilst the fin in the photograph is pale, obviously if I was spending a lot more time on this, I could put a lot more detail into it. But let's add that cobalt turquoise in. And I'm going to do a kind of forced soft spatter. What do I mean with that? Rather than necessarily tapping my brush to create very random spatter, what I'm going to do is go into areas that I know are damp. I have to be quite quick with this, and a small brush to create pattern and texture and allow it to diffuse into the wetter areas. If the area has dried, if I've missed my chance with it, with that small number 2 brush, you can create a damp area. Let's go into that fin, which I know is wet. So I can tidy up a few little areas of it, and I can create that kind of soft little diffused pattern. It gives the idea of scales without actually having to paint them all in. And I'm not the slowest painter in the world. I do paint very quickly. And so anything that speeds up the process for me or gets to the result that I want in fewer brush strokes is always a bonus. Now let's put some texture around this gill area. I've missed the boat with some of it, but this is still damp here. And again, I don't need to do all of it. It's very tempting when you've got this tiny little brush in your hand to suddenly start making everything this pattern, but you really don't need to. What I could probably do with as well to balance it up is to take some of that green where I mixed the bees gold and the cobalt turquoise together and create some patterns with that colour too. So it's not all done in the cobalt turquoise. It will create some interest around the eye. I'm going to come back to the eye and deepen that up in a little bit. Let's put some texture around here. That's actually working really nicely. Let's focus our texture on the head area, because then that will draw our viewers' attention, won't it? Soften that a little bit. And I think a tiny touch of this green that we mixed into that mouth area too. And while that's still damp, I'm going to go back to the black. Oh, I've just missed a little smudge there. Let's just smudge that out. That's better. Soften that a little bit. I'm in grave danger of faffing, and I mustn't do that. While we have some damp colour, let's go into the black iron oxide with the small brush and deepen some of the colours just to show that there are some folds and some shadows going on. You could do this with pen at the end if you really wanted to, but for the purposes of today's sketch, we're going to use a little black paint. It's only really to isolate that head shape from the shoulder. We can afford to put some dark into that gill area. Let's blend that out. The black iron oxide is a very, very soft black, so you don't need to worry so much about it looking too hard. It grades out into the most beautiful granulation and is very useful for shadows. I think one more under the chin before we get in. That's much better. Shadow under there. And I'm going to leave that alone now. What I need to do is to allow all of that to dry. And then the last little touch that we're going to do when I know that everything is completely dry is to finish the eye off. Now that that's dry, I'm going to do some final touches to the eye of the lizard. And it definitely have the right colour here with the bees gold. Let's go in with that and put a little tiny touch of yellow to make that beady eye. I'm going to check that that's bright enough just on my kitchen roll. Maybe, let's pop it over on the palette actually. Let's just double check. I didn't want there to be any of that cobalt turquoise, which I may have inadvertently put my brush in, but I think that will be okay. Nice, fresh, bright, vivid yellow. So we can pop some little flicks of colour around on the eye, It's just to show that that's a little bit different. That works really well. Perhaps a little stronger maybe. I always like to push my materials as far as I possibly can. And then you could choose to leave that to dry. You could go back in with the pen, but I'm going to add one little touch of black iron oxide. This is such a great black. Like I was saying about the other colours for getting a deep tone and a pale tone, you can see how pale the black iron oxide is on the log, but I'm going to finish off with a touch of black. I don't want it to run into the yellow, and I want there to be a highlight, but it certainly needs to be a little bit beadier than I had it. I can put some touches of black all the way around, and there you have it. My Basilisk Lizard using Cobalt Turquoise as the star of the show.